Okay.
But just because I do.
Appreciate those of you that have stayed through this. We've got a few more agenda items, and hopefully we can get through them relatively efficiently. Commissioner Title, I appreciate her willingness to lead us on a conversation on best practices with respect to diversity plans. So let's just go in sequence here. Commissioner Title will facilitate the conversation, but obviously I welcome comments and involvement from all the other commissioners as well. So Commissioner Title, if you'd like to start.
Do you want to be in charge of clicking? Or
I'll be in charge of clicking. I like that. It makes me feel
I'm honored.
honored. Thank you. I knew there was a word there. Go ahead, Commissioner Paddle.
Thank you. So, so when you're the first state to do something, I think it requires more thought, more monitoring, more ongoing discussion, and adjustments. So I think it makes sense to stop and have this discussion about diversity plans in light of the data that we're seeing before this presentation, and we'll see some more after this presentation, and have an unrushed, relaxed discussion ahead of the regulatory process. Give everyone a chance to raise any outstanding questions that might need to be researched, and generally I'll be on the same page. So to review, the Commission has a legal requirement for diversity, specifically to include minorities, women, and veterans, both at the ownership and employee/agent level. And our current model, which I think is pretty sensible, was to give businesses that same obligation to create a diversity plan, but to allow them flexibility, understanding that every company is different and the region they're in is different, and allow them to design their own plans. We just check whether they have goals, programs, and measurements. And we signal that it's very important to us. It's part of our regulations. It's part of our legal mandate. I think it's understood that diversity plans are very difficult to implement successfully across industries, but a lot of things we require are difficult. It's hard to get to an HCA, it's hard to get a property, it's hard to go through the whole process. This is another requirement. So that's the current model. To review, the application includes a requirement, diversity plans to promote equity among minorities, women, veterans, people with disabilities, and people of all gender identities and sexual orientation in the operation of the marijuana establishment. The plan shall outline the goals, programs, and measurements the marijuana establishment will pursue once licensed. At the time of renewal, require documentation demonstrating substantial effort or progress towards achieving its goals submitted as part of the diversity plan. So these are our current regulations. Let's look at if this is working. So I just want to be clear, the purpose here is not to shame anyone or to accuse anybody of not caring about diversity. I have no doubt that the intent is there. And I think we understand as much as anybody that when you're running a business in the cannabis industry, everything is really much harder than you think it is. It takes longer than you think, and it's impossible to do the things that you want to do sometimes, no matter what your intent is. So you focus on your legal requirement. This is one of those legal requirements, both for us and for you. And so I think this should be a collaborative process because we want you to succeed. So looking at the comparison here from October 15th, 2018, allowing up until January 10th, 2020 for diversity plans to be implemented and take place, we see no change at all. And this is something that cannot be explained by demographic differences, where they are in the state. There are women everywhere. So it's pretty clear that the diversity plans have not been implemented as expected or required. Next slide. We see similar concerns with race, with, in fact, as other commissioners have pointed out, the percentage of white employees has actually moved from 70% up to 74%. So I think the purpose today is to have an initial discussion of best practices and elements of an effective plan. Obviously, there's only so much we can talk about in a short presentation here, but it can hopefully spark some ideas and maybe help people to expand the way that they think about diversity plans. I know that up until now, what I see a lot in diversity plans is that people are picking up fragments from what they hear when we set conditions. And that's not the best way to come up with your plan. I think it's better if we just have an open and comprehensive discussion now. As I mentioned, we can raise questions now if we need things researched. And it's important to note, if you look at other industries, like the tech industry, for example, when there are commitments to increase diversity, it often takes a very heavy lift just to see a small change because the culture is already established, the workforce is already established, versus if you are working on implementing your plan before you open, before you begin hiring, it's a lot more effective. And on the aggregate level, earlier success on diversity and inclusion is going to then be more impactful as the industry grows. And then, of course, the legislature requires us to track and adjust these figures and take measures as appropriate. So this is part of that process. We are obviously not in the business of giving business advice, but I do think it's important to stop here and note that the last bullet point is, of course, important to be compliant with state law and regulations, but this is not just a feel-good, squishy goal that we're trying to reach. It's in fact very clear based on research in other industries. I'm not familiar of any research on benefits of diversity in the cannabis industry, but in other industries, it's clear that more diverse, inclusive companies have better financial performance, they're more innovative, they're better equipped to handle uncertain environments, which is extremely relevant, I think, to this industry. And there's reduced turnover, which is also very important when you have very limited people with experience, as in this industry. When you have somebody who's experienced, you want to keep them. To me, I think that there's two reasons for these benefits. One is you have better decision-making with diverse teams. So one really interesting study looked at juries that were more diverse in how they made decisions. And what they found is if you are trying to make a case to somebody who's coming from a different background than you have to make your case more effectively. Versus if you have a number of people who come from the exact same background, you take more shortcuts, you don't necessarily have the same obligation to make your case and to overcome challenges to the point that you're making. And so they found that more diverse juries made objectively better decisions in the way that they considered evidence. The second thing is just a sense of belonging. So it of course translates to diversity when people feel like they belong, that they have a chance, that they have the opportunity to grow. It's good for everybody, but it's particularly good for those groups that would otherwise face barriers or be marginalized. So all of this is to say, when I look at renewals sometimes, and I look at those progress reports, I can feel the businesses saying, like, you already asked me to do so much and now you want me to worry about diversity. You know, I have a million different priorities I need to take care of. But when you implement a good diversity plan, it really affects all of your other goals as well. Okay, so this slide is a concrete overview to help guide and think about what a good diversity plan might look like, and to supplement that fractured understanding that I mentioned before. So a good diversity plan is not just on paper. It's very good for it to be led by the leadership at the top or by experts that come in and help. That's totally appropriate. But the key is to take it from on paper to in practice. At every meeting that you have and every project that you have, is that mission of your diversity plan being considered? And has it been successfully communicated to everyone in the company? Going beyond hiring is really important. Our diversity plans tend to focus on the career fairs and the seminars and the hiring and the percentages of hiring, which are all important, but there's the next 90% after that of, are they staying, do they have confidence, and do they have trust that this is being implemented? It focuses on bringing the best out of individuals so that they can thrive, which is in contrast to looking at people you're interviewing or hiring and considering whether they're a good fit. Good fit is kind of outdated. The key is to help all different kinds of people thrive so you get those benefits of diversity. We talked about a sense of belonging. Integrating skills from the training to a day-to-day experience isn't something that just happens if you don't make it happen. So a lot of diversity plans include unconscious bias training or other types of training, but if you don't design specifically how will you use this training in your day-to-day job and communicating with each other, then you might as well not do the training. And then, of course, it should be regularly evaluated through feedback, adjusted accordingly, and it does require hard work. And whether or not you're doing these things will be reflected eventually in the measurements that you are making. Okay, so let's move on to the elements of a diversity plan. It is important to set quantitative goals that can be measured. I would encourage more than just what we typically see in terms of X percentage of X group. And that comes up a lot in meetings because if a company has chosen to use it as their goals, then that's what we'll talk about. But it's also appropriate to talk about morale, engagement, turnover, and many other goals. You can also talk about qualitative goals. And I think it's really important to codify your culture through an organizational statement that you refer back to frequently, much like we refer back to our mission statement. And committing to implementing those policies is really important because even if you have the best diversity team in the world, you're doing it wrong if you never have someone complaining or asking you to progress. And you should feel uncomfortable at some points when you're implementing and upholding your written policies. That should be built in to how you move from something that's on paper to something that's real. Examples of measurements include workforce utilization reports. That's a template to break down the different levels in your company, from entry level all the way up to leadership, and the way that you're utilizing the workforce, including the different demographics. Employee feedback, morale, engagement, and turnover can be measured by surveys, as I mentioned. One major red flag for me is that quite a few businesses put in their diversity plans that they would be using surveys in this manner, and I haven't seen any of them compiled and noted in the progress report. So I think that's something to focus on. So now we get into programs. Our guidance has a list of programs that focus on interview and hiring process that are important, but I think it's also very important to talk about after hiring. Developing a cross-functional diversity-focused committee is a really useful way to make sure that you're being held accountable. Cross-functional just means that if you have, say, one or two people on each team that are focused on making sure they're considering your organizational policies that are focused on diversity, they can bring it up at that time, and they should feel encouraged to do that, and then they can come back to the committee with the people from other teams and talk about how they can work together. Definitely giving employees training and development opportunities is important. That's part of belonging and growth. Building cultural competency. So sometimes you will see very well-off companies with plenty of resources who make a mistake where, for example, you might be looking at it and thinking like, oh, if there was a woman on that board, if there was a woman in that room, that would have never happened. You can prevent that by diversity, and you can prevent that by building cultural competency as well. And you should be able to articulate, as I mentioned, how you move training into everyday situations. That should be an explicit part of the training. setting and communicating clear expectations and consistent standards for everybody, and then considering externally discussing these policies, particularly for people who want to apply to your company, that can be part of your branding. And then celebrating successes, both diversity related and just in general, is a really important way to make people feel like they matter, that they belong, that they're being heard, that their work is being seen. And that contributes to diversity, particularly people who may not otherwise be getting that kind of recognition in more informal ways. And then it's really important to have a forum for open conversations when the populations that you're trying to reach or encourage have something to say. It's very important that that's communicated and done openly as part of your plan. So those were all just, as I mentioned, part of a unstructured, informal discussion about diversity plans and best practices. This is by no means codified. That's something that we can come back to later, but this was just so we can have a discussion. Some frequently asked questions I wanted to talk about. We get asked, what's the difference between a diversity plan that's internal, that's about you and your staff and your employees and leadership, versus your plan to positively impact disproportionately harmed people, which is internal or external. And the populations are different between the two because you have very specific populations laid out in our guidance that are considered to be disproportionately harmed. A woman, an Asian person, a person with a disability may be included in a diversity plan, but they're not considered to be disproportionately harmed on that basis. We get asked a lot, what if you're located in an area that is not racially diverse? In that case, I would ask, what about women? What about veterans? What about all of the other populations? We get asked, why is that typo such a big deal? Specifically, in our regulations, we refer to promoting equity among different populations, and then we talk about people of all gender identities. And then people will copy and paste, and then they'll assign a percentage to each population. The reason it's a big deal, well, first of all, the reason it's written that way is because sometimes you need to adjust for each population. Sometimes you'll see when you're asking for backgrounds on a person, you'll have checkboxes for some things. If you're asking for gender or sex, you'll often see a blank because that's the most appropriate way to do it. It was most appropriate to say people of all gender identities and sexual orientations. It was not expected that you would copy and paste that and not read it and assign a percentage. So that's why the typo is such a big deal, because if you are making a plan that's based on those goals and programs that are based on those goals, then they should make sense. We get asked, what if our pool of applicants isn't diverse? That's a very common problem, and there are definitely measures that you can take to expand your pool of applicants, and that can be part of your diversity plan and your outreach. And then what if we don't reach our goals? For that, I would just refer you back to the regulations, which require a documentation demonstrating substantial effort or progress. So if you show substantial effort or progress, you've met the regulations, and in particular, I think if you said you're going to measure something, you should measure it. If you've said you're going to survey employees, you should survey your employees. So with that, I will open it up to discussion.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Tao, for your leadership. Any comments or questions for Commission, for the staff? Commissioner Flanagan?
Thank you, Commissioner Title, for your clarification. I think that as we've gone through the licensing process, there have been some companies that certainly have questions with regards to the diversity plan versus the positive impact plan. Certainly, I think companies are trying to do well and applicants are trying to adhere to the standard. And specifically, what if we're located in an area that's not racially diverse? I think the big question for me and the thing that I hope to talk about going forward is, what is diversity? Because I know that we have listed in our regulations women, veterans, people of color, minorities, people who live in disproportionately impacted areas. But I think there's a whole host of people that we could include in this, those that may not have the opportunity to go to college, those that may have been harmed in other ways that may be able to fill these gaps. When you think of different communities across the state, there are some that are just not racially diverse. I mean, it's not in their makeup. Or if you live in a town that has 500 people and you can't pull from those people who want these jobs, we should think about ways to make concessions for that or certain exceptions for that. I think if we're going to have an industry that really encompasses the entire state, we need to think outside the box as to who we're trying to help. I know that question 4 obviously has a very specific group of people that they were trying to help with legalization, but I think now that it's here and we're 2 years into this, we can have the conversation of maybe expanding on that so that more people are included in this. And I think that's why when Shakia was here today and she was talking about the social equity program, my question is not how many people are in the pool or how many people are going through the motions, but how many people are truly going to benefit from this? Like, what's the outcome later? Versus people who just choose to participate and then may decide they don't want to be part of this anymore. And I think that, one, given the percentage by which the question passed, there's still some hesitation by the state. They don't know what this means. They don't know what legalization is. Some of the comments that we've heard going across the state is, well, I didn't know what I was voting for. I didn't know what it meant. And then there are other people who have said to me, well, how do I get involved if I'm not one of these categories? And so it's very categorical for them. And so when we talk about diversity plans, maybe there's a way through our regulatory process that we can expand a little so that we can include more people. And then if we're truly going to make this a legitimate, normalized industry, those people have to be included as well. And so the suggestions that you have, I think, are very helpful for applicants. But I think as this industry evolves in Massachusetts, as we take a look at what it means for the Berkshires versus Metro West versus Central Mass versus the South Shore versus the Cape versus Boston, there are very different needs and very different groups of people who live in those places. I often joke that when we were in the Berkshires, they're used to sharing one grocery store for 12 towns. They're not going to have one on every block like Boston might. And so we have to be able to accommodate that. And, when you come up here to Central Mass and even where I'm from in North Central Mass, sometimes you do things that look out of the ordinary because it's easy access for people. We don't have a robust transportation system. So when I see diversity plans where they say, well, we're going to hire from the closest disproportionately impacted area, and that town's 40 miles away. No one's driving 40 miles in central to western Mass for a job that's not going to pay them enough to put gas in their car. We don't have busing systems. We don't have the MBTA. We don't have all that. So I'm hoping that as we go forward, we think about those things as ways to help the industry be able to comply with the regulations and the law. So I appreciate your efforts on this.
Actually, picking up on Commissioner Flanagan's comments, I like the fact that our statute emphasizes that we should do things in an evidence-based way. And what I would like to do, and hopefully the Director of Research will not come on after this and...
She's sitting right in the back corner, so be careful.
She's probably going
to... And she's got her, I can see her antenna have just gotten raised.
Sorry, Dr. Johnson, but I'm wondering if we can engage with the licensees about what their hurdles actually are in terms of documenting it and perhaps documenting what the hurdles are in different parts of the state, because as Commissioner Flanagan points out, there are differences in transportation, accessibility, et cetera, because if we can start looking at what the hurdles are as the licensees are struggling to meet the goals of their diversity plans, maybe it will inform our decision making and help them, in terms of how they can do better on the numbers we're seeing.
That makes sense. Commissioner Flanagan?
Maybe this is one of the topics we can use for a roundtable as we go across the state that on the agenda and we talk to different stakeholders, because I think that again, we had some micro businesses here today. We had some of the little guys that are trying to get into this industry 2 hires to them might be a big deal, rather than the big industry that's gonna hire 100 people and 20 hires aren't a big deal to them. So maybe
I think it's a great idea.
maybe we can get some feedback, not only from the applicants, but from the general public, as to what they think about this. Because it's not just about industry anymore. It's about communities, and it's about people who want to be hired. And if we're going to encompass all this, then I think we need to start looking beyond just industry and what industry thinks to think, to see what people truly are looking for as this comes to their communities.
Great. I think got some actionable next steps, Commissioner McBride?
So I think that we all agree that this is critically important. But I also want to put out there that beggars can't be choosers here. So we, over the course of the past 2.5 years, I think, all of us have engaged in a lot of different conversations with a lot of different entities, whether they are on the nonprofit side, and they are providing, trying to provide resources to individuals who might be in, economic empowerment or social equity positions, or whether they are on the, for lack of a better way to say it, sort of the industry business side, the entities that are trade type organizations. And I think that one of the things that has been concerning to me that I think everyone kind of needs to get over here is that everyone has something to offer on this. The conversation should be ongoing, but that people should, we can't really be making choices about, this entity is going to have a job fair, and we're not going to go to that job fair because we don't like, what's represented over there, and then turn around and say, what are you doing on the industry side to, help people get jobs, or to help people, obtain capital to open businesses, where there's been a little bit of a, we're going to kind of pick and choose to make statements. And I think that we're at a point where we need to be asking people to step up and do what they should be doing, but there also needs to be collaboration and willingness to maybe cross some borders, where though there has been this real reticence of like, you're over there and I'm over here, and never the twain shall meet. And so I think that people need to acknowledge that in and of itself as an issue and work on that. And beggars can't be choosers. Everyone should be working together in the same vein to try to implement this. And if you have a lot of resources, you should be implementing this like 100,000% moving ahead. And if you don't have a lot of resources, you should be doing what you can, and also looking for and asking for like partnerships and ways to try to get to that point. And so I think that I guess I just kind of I want to call it what it is, right? Which is like, we can't go on anymore and kind of pretend like there aren't divisions within the industry in this state, and what we're doing and what we're asking people to do. So let's be realistic about what we're asking people to do, and let's acknowledge where there are divisions, and let's not pretend like we're everything is everyone can kind of operate in their silos, and it's going to go along okay and resolve itself. So I think that we have tried to bring this along, and we and I huge credit to Commissioners Title and Flanagan for being on top of this, and for trying to push it along, and being very explicit in particular plans. But I think that there really overall there kind of needs to be a moment here of identifying that everyone needs to collaborate on these pieces, and that it's no longer, okay to say, or, without good reason, I'm not going to participate in that because I just think that you stand for something that I don't necessarily believe in. I mean, have that conversation, but call it what it is.
Thank you. I actually, I'd like to meld, at least my opinion, what you just said, Commissioner McBride, with what Commissioner Flanagan suggested, which is, I love the idea of roundtables. I love the idea of roundtables, though not to be one group, but to be cross-functional and crossing some of the boundaries that you just talked about. So I would love to see a roundtable or several roundtables getting all the disparate elements together and having the kind of conversation you just articulated. So I think it's a great idea. I do support the idea of roundtables. We just, on the subject of roundtables, we did agree that after the listening session we had a while back, that one of the follow-up steps would be roundtables. I've asked the executive director to work with commission staff and commissioners on a plan for that, and that will be on the agenda for our next meeting in March. I'm not saying that's the only thing that we should do, but I certainly think that's certainly part of the next step. Any other comments or questions on this? Thank you again, Commissioner Title, and I think we're all committed to this. I think you made the point. I know I get criticized by some people by saying this, but you made a point that I think is very important, which is this is hard, and it takes a lot of work, and it takes, as Commissioner McBride just said, a lot of collaboration. So I appreciate you advancing the conversation, but I know we have a lot of work to do here, but I think there's a commitment across the commission to keep working hard on getting this right. So thank you for that. Any other comments from Lon? Okay, this one, I promise you will be a relatively short conversation. Our governing law requires us to appoint one commissioner as secretary to the commission and one commissioner as treasurer to the commission for an annual term. I would like to ask for a motion to appoint, and first of all, I think now we've been in business for over 2 years. I think all 4 of my fellow commissioners have served at least one term in one of those offices. So unfortunately, it's time to go back to the well and ask for the willingness of commissioners to serve a second term. So I'd like to ask for a motion, please, to appoint Commissioner Title as the secretary of the commission. Can I have such a motion?
So moved.
Thanks. Let the record show that Commissioner Doyle made the motion to approve, seconded by Commissioner Flanagan. All in favor?
Aye.
Let the record show the commission unanimously appointed Commissioner Title to secretary of the commission. I would also like to ask for a motion, please, to appoint Commissioner Doyle as the treasurer of the commission. Can I have such a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you. Can I have a second? Let the record show Commissioner Flanagan made the motion to approve, seconded by Commissioner McBride. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Let the record show the commission has to approve the appointment of Commissioner Doyle as treasurer. My thanks to both Commissioner Title and Commissioner Doyle for agreeing to serve in these roles, and to all 4 of you for having played these roles in the past, and for those of you that have longer terms, likely in the future. So thank you very much. The next agenda item is a research report from our Director of Research, Dr. Johnson, on market data and industry participation. I'm sorry that we've kept you waiting for as long as we have, Dr. Johnson, but I know we're all looking very much forward to hearing your report, so thank you. We've had 2 different approaches here. I've clicked, or you can click. It's your call.
Yeah.
I figured, you seem like the kind of person, you want to click for yourself. If you can't handle it, I'll do it for you.
I got it. All right. So thank you, Director Collins, Chairman Hoffman, and Commissioners Doyle, Flanagan, McBride, and Title for your time and attention this afternoon. Today, I'm excited to present to you our first.
Yeah, I think you need
Turn the microphone on.
to turn it on first of all. Yeah, thank you.
There you go.
And then you probably need to get just a little bit closer to you, Dr. Johnson.
I heard a rumor that these
A
were.
little bit closer.
Okay. Today I'm excited to present to
Not
you.
that close.
Today, I am excited to present to you our first research report assessing the adult use cannabis industry, titled "A Baseline Review and Assessment of Adult Use
Massachusetts cannabis industry. This sixth research report marks the end of our first annual Chapter 55, Section 17A research mandate, which is especially exciting since it uses commission data and essentially looks at how far we've come as a commission in both creating and regulating a new industry in Massachusetts. So congratulations to all on such a massive feat. Before delving into this report, I want to first acknowledge commission leadership and staff members who played a critical role in this report and ongoing research. First, Director Collins, for your vision and leadership on the open data platform. This platform permits a transparent assessment of the new cannabis industry, for better or for worse, and provides a wealth of information for assessment purposes to be used both internally and externally. Dr. David McKenna, who I'm not sure is in the room anymore, for bringing the open data platform to life, which I now realize was a profound amount of work, and also in assisting the research team in compiling this report today. The licensing and enforcement team for being rock stars and answering multiple questions we had regarding the licensing process so we can make sense of this data. And lastly, Samantha, who unfortunately is unable to be here today, but nonetheless never fails to impress me with her research capabilities so early in her career. This report is able to be presented today thanks to her diligence in learning this data and understanding the complexity of seed-to-sale tracking assessments across legalized states. So as always, but especially for this report, it is always a team effort, even though I'm here presenting it, and I think that's important to acknowledge. Highlighted in green are the Chapter 55 research priority items that this report covers. I want to preface this by saying that not all highlighted items were able to be assessed, and results strictly look at the first 12 months of the adult use market versus both the medical and adult use market together. Also, an assessment of the illicit market was unable to be assessed for this report. Saying this, we hope to include both of these assessments in future reports. In this presentation, I will first cover a policy heterogeneity framework that we use to organize this presentation and present the baseline data, followed by the actual baseline data using the first 12 months of adult use retail sales. And lastly, I will contextualize findings through a literature review. Findings and projections from other states offer key insights, but we know that analyses that do not account for a state's unique policy-scape miss critical differences. We use the 14 Ps of legalization framework created by Dr. Bo Kilmer, Director of RAND's Drug Policy Research Center, to help place this data in a state-specific context. These 14 topics refer to key areas in which cannabis policy and regulatory design choices will directly impact the outcomes of legalization. This framework is based on research showing that varying policies, regulation, implementation, and fidelity of enforcement will have differential impacts of the legalization. In my presentation, I will focus on the 4 highlighted factors here, including production, product types, prices, and the preference for licenses. We additionally examined a potential 15th P that could be added to this framework, which adds an assessment of participation in the industry. A comprehensive assessment of participation permits us to empirically assess the effectiveness of our mission to regulate an industry characterized by robust participation by small and large participants, minorities, women, veterans, and communities disproportionately harmed by cannabis prohibition. Okay, so now let's dive into the data. This study time frame spans from November 20th, 2018 to November 20th, 2019, representing the first full year of legal adult use retail sales. The first P we'll discuss is production. Researchers expect that production in the legal market will be less expensive and more efficient than the illicit market. However, the extent and efficiency of production will be impacted by policy decisions, including the number and size of licensed producers, production locations.
Keep going.
I'm scared too. And production constraints. In this report, we measure legal production by the number of licensed cultivators in total plant activity and volume. Is it still echoing?
I'm sorry,
Okay.
I apologize. If you wouldn't mind just powering through.
Yeah. All right, in this study.
We will get our audio visual before the next meeting. But thank you very much. I apologize.
In the study, maybe I should give this to you. In the study timeframe, 98 final licenses were issued in Massachusetts, with another 99 provisional license issued and an additional 30 applications under provisional consideration. These licenses represent approximately 5% of total applications. The remaining applications are included in the in-process category and refers to applications that are incomplete, pending, or withdrawn. Among the 98 final licenses, 37% were for marijuana retailers, 32% for marijuana cultivators, 27% for marijuana product manufacturers, 2% for independent testing labs, and another 2% for marijuana transporter with other existing establishment licenses. Below, you will see a timeline showing that the first final licenses were issued in October 2018, and 2 cannabis retailers opened to the public on November 20th, 2018. Final licenses for retailers, cultivators, and product manufacturers have increased at a steady pace through November 2019. However, independent testing laboratories have remained at 2 final licenses since mid-October 2019. Returning to production, we saw on the last slide that just over 30% of final licenses were cultivators. Since November 2019, the 31 licensed marijuana cultivators recording a total approximately 372,000 plants, 372,000 plants in the seed-to-sale tracking system. This total represents all non-immature plants, including those that are vegetative, flowering, harvested, and destroyed. It does not include immature plants since there is a high destruction rate and they are not tagged at this level of nuance. In the graph underneath on the right, we see the progression of these plant production phases as the adult use industry was established in Massachusetts, and we can now continue to monitor these trends as the industry expands and saturates across the state. Next, we look at product types. In this framework, Dr. Kilmer identifies decisions about the types of cannabis products available for sale in retail stores that will affect outcomes. As we know, here in Massachusetts, there are a wide range of products available to be permitted and regulated. In this report, we present aggregate analyses for each product category. However, going forward, we aim to further break down product categories to better understand product-specific patterns as they would change and fluctuate over time. In the first year of adult use retail stores, buds or flower made up the majority of products sold, comprising about 51% of the total units sold. This is followed by the concentrate each category, making up 19% of products sold, followed by infused edibles, which make up 17%. These categories are the classification options used in the seed-to-sale tracking system. Specific definitions are included in further detail in the report. We do want to highlight the difference between the categories concentrate and concentrate each, as we realize this coding may generate some questions. Both categories are for cannabis products that are refined from flower into a more purified and potent form. However, concentrate each refers to products that are recorded by count, whereas concentrate is used for products recorded in weight. Concentrate each is typically used in prepackaged concentrations where there is a standard weight, such as vaporizer cartridge, whereas concentrate may be used for a purchase of a specific weight of a specific type of product, such as shatter or wax. This coding variation may represent a limitation in the data since different licensees or employees inputting the data may interpret categories differently, so something to think about. In addition to the percent of total units each category comprises, as in the previous slide, we also examine what percent of total sales each product category includes. This could help illustrate which product types are contributing the most to total sales in dollars and potentially help illustrate profit incentives. It should be noted that we do not have data on cost per manufacture and purchase of each product type, so analyses here do not represent the profit margins. What we can see here is that buds or flower represent 51% of the total products sold, accounting for 49% of total sales. Concentrate each represents 19% of products sold, accounting for 27% of total sales, and infused edibles represent 17% of products sold, accounting for 15% of total sales. The next P here is price, a measure we will also come back to in the literature review. Dr. Kilmer identified multiple policy choices that impact price and notes that price will impact many outcomes, including consumption, tax revenue, diversion, and legal versus illicit cannabis consumption. Dr. Kilmer emphasizes price per unit of THC as an important metric to track. Unfortunately, we were unable to assess this measure for this report, but again, this provides us something to think about for future data and monitoring. To provide a sense of scale, this table shows total sales in dollars from November 20th, 2018 to November 20th, 2019. Analyses include adult use retail stores and co-located stores. It is important to also note that this figure and all analyses included in this report do not include an assessment of taxes. We see that sales totaled approximately $390 million in the first year of adult use retail sales, or about an average of over $1 million in sales per day. Next, we examine total units and total in dollars for each product category to examine the average price per unit for each product category on the right-hand side. A unit refers to the count of a specific item. For example, if a consumer purchases 1 ounce of a variety of cannabis bud, this would be 1 unit. If another consumer purchased 1 pre-roll, that would also be coded as 1 unit. In the first year of retail sales, buds or flower were the most frequently purchased product category, at about a price of $41 per unit. Second, this was followed by units of concentrate each at an average price of $60 per unit. And third were infused edibles at an average of $38 per unit. We also look at the aggregate price per unit of all product categories combined to examine preliminary trends and average costs, which are displayed above. The average price per unit of all cannabis product types combined range from $39 to $45 per month. The average price per unit in the first year of retail stores was approximately $43. The next P we look at is preference for licenses. This category shows the utility of Dr. Kilmer's framework in attempting to include variables in which state-specific and dynamic policy, regulatory, and implementation changes may affect outcomes in Massachusetts data. During the study period of this report, current medical treatment centers and persons with economic empowerment certification status had priority status in the licensing process. Among final licenses, provisional licenses, and those under provisional consideration by November 2019, 69% of licenses had registered medical marijuana treatment center priority, 1% had economic empowerment priority, and the remaining 30% were general applicants with no priority status. Well, it is not specifically noted in Dr. Kilmer's framework, and although she's not here today, I have to give Samantha another accolade for recommending that we add a 15th P to this existing framework to additionally include participation as it relates to ownership and employment trends by demographic cohorts, which is guided by a framework of policy and regulatory decisions. Saying that, I will present 2 types of participation data today. The first is the individual level as captured in agent registrations, and the second is at the business level as captured in varying self-reported diversity and ownership measures. Before we dive into the data, there are some caveats I want to explain around capturing agent data. So as of November 20th, 2019, there were 6,973 agent registrations reported, but these registrations only represent 4,228 unique agents, unique people, since individuals may have more than 1 agent registration if associated with more than 1 license type. So there are 2 limitations of the data presented today. First, we are limited to reporting agent registration data. Therefore, certain individual agents may be counted 2 or more times. Second, agent data may be reported by an establishment owner rather than self-reported by each individual agent. Thus, the accuracy and consistency of this data are unknown. The above chart shows that as of November 2019, the greatest number of agent registrations were associated with employees at 82%, followed by managers at 7%, and executives at 6%. When we look at the breakdown of agents in each license type, as of November 2019, we see the greatest number of agent registrations were associated with marijuana retailers at 38%, followed by marijuana cultivators at 32%, and marijuana product manufacturers at 28%. Race ethnicity is not reported for approximately 10% of agent registrations. Out of the registrations where race is reported, the majority of agent registration identified as white at 74%. Approximately 7% of agent registrations were Hispanic, Latino, Spanish persons, and about 5% were Black African American persons. All other racial ethnic cohorts only made up about 2% of agent registrations.
Unfortunately, we were unable to aggregate race ethnicity by role in the industry, such as board member, owner, manager, employee, because it's not currently linked at the individual level. This limitation represents a gap in the findings presented, but we aim to work with relevant vendors and commission staff to link these data sets to permit such assessments in the future. The majority of agent registrations identified as male at 67%, compared to their female counterparts at 33%. When we look at each role, we also see variation between genders. Specifically, female agent registrations made up 16% of total board members, 17% of directors, 35% of employees, 19% of executives, and 31% of managers. Veteran status is also reported in agent registrations. Of all agent registrations, only 3% report veteran status. 89% of registrations did not report veteran status, and another 8% preferred not to indicate status. Of the 183 agent registrations reporting veteran status, 79% were for employees, 9% for directors, 7% for executives, 3% were managers, and another 2% were board members. Farmer status is also included in agent registrations. Data show that the vast majority of agent registrations do not report farmer status, at least 99%, with only less than 1% reporting farmer status for a total of 65 registrations. Of those that reported farmer status, 60% of registrations were for employees, 18% for managers, and another 14% were executives. The majority of agent registrations were for Massachusetts residents at 83%, compared to out-of-state residents at 17%. Although not pictured here, if we look even more broadly, we can see that 96% of registrations are from New England residents. Okay, so this slide includes one of the more important findings, I think, especially in light of some of the discussions you've had earlier today. So I hope not to bore you yet, or don't fall asleep yet. Thinking about social equity provisions and our mission to rectify past harms from cannabis prohibition, our team ran additional analyses to assess agent registrations reporting residents in any of the 29 cities and towns identified as areas of disproportionate impact, or ADIs. There are some limitations to this analysis, since only certain census tracts qualify as an ADI in 4 cities: Boston, Worcester, Lowell, and Springfield, and we were unable to stratify agent registration into specific census tracts. Therefore, the presented numbers today likely overestimate agents solely living in an ADI census tract. ADIs only represent 8% of the state, but they make up 30% of all reported agent registration residencies for Massachusetts, which shows how these social equity provisions have already impacted these communities. The majority of these agent registrations report residents from Fall River at 272, Worcester at 233, Boston at 231, Springfield at 114. Fitchburg, Lowell, Brockton, and Holyoke followed, each reporting over 75 agent registrations. We also looked at diversity and ownership at the business level through measures collected at the Commission. In this data, diverse businesses may be included in any or all the following 5 categories, including women-owned, veteran-owned, minority-owned, LGBTI-owned, and disability-owned. For purposes of this report, we refer to businesses self-reporting any of these diversity criteria as diversity in ownership, or DIOs. All diversity and ownership data are self-reported by the marijuana establishment. Approximately 10%, a sample of 227 businesses, identified as having diversity and ownership among final licensed, provisionally licensed, and provisionally approved license. Or provisionally approved applications, I'm sorry. Now I'm going to shift gears to the literature review, which helps put Massachusetts data into the context of the cannabis industry literature overall. We identified 12 studies about demand-side economics for cannabis, including price elasticity, or how much price affects the demand for cannabis. However, all but one study included participants in jurisdictions where cannabis is illegal, so it is unknown whether these results generalize to populations such as Massachusetts residents where cannabis is legalized. Studies consistently find price elasticity for cannabis, meaning as the price of cannabis increases, the demand for cannabis decreases.
Although specific estimates of elasticity vary, likely reflecting different research samples and methods in the studies, importantly, sensitivity may also differ by populations. For example, youth typically demonstrate more sensitivity to price compared to their adult counterparts. Studies also find that legal cannabis is favored as a substitution for illicit cannabis. One study published in 2019 found that the price elasticity for legal cannabis was 43% lower than the elasticity for illicit cannabis. This study additionally reports that a legal cannabis option greatly reduced the elasticity of illicit cannabis. Price also impacts the substitution effect. Literature shows that consumers were willing to pay more for legal cannabis until a certain threshold, when preferences changed back to the illicit market if prices were deemed too high. One study reports that legal cannabis was strongly preferred when priced similarly to slightly higher than the illicit market. These results suggest that legal cannabis is preferred, but a price that is too high may result in more users staying in or moving to the illicit market. However, there are additional factors beyond price that have either empirically shown or theoretically affect the demand for cannabis. While outside the scope of this report, harm perception, policy environment, and legal risks also impact demand. Individuals living in a state with legal cannabis may weigh systematically different risks and benefits when determining their own demand for cannabis in non-legalized states than those in non-legalized states. We identified 7 studies about consumer patterns in our product and potency patterns in legal adult use markets, the majority of which only use Washington state data. Researchers ultimately expect cannabis prices do decrease if there is a move from the illicit market to a legal market due to increased efficiencies. However, this is less likely to occur in the short term for varying reasons, such as delay in licensing, heightened demand, and lags in production capacity. Dr. Bakula argues that if prices do not decrease, then short-run factors are dominating the current market. If short-run factors are at play, researchers suggest that consumption levels are unlikely to change significantly, and therefore any preliminary research, assessing the impact of cannabis laws and potential harms will not fully capture the impact of a mature market. 4 articles examined cannabis price in the illegal adult use market. One study found that cannabis prices did not increase in the 5 months after cannabis markets opened. Another 3 studies found that cannabis prices decreased soon after the market opened and over a period of 2 to 3 years. Using data from Washington State, 4 studies examined the types of legal adult use products sold. Studies find that flower accounts for the majority of sales, but later declined in percent of the market share as other forms of consumption gained in popularity. An analysis of 2.5 years of retail sales report that together, wax, shatter, and resin represent the fastest growing product segment. Several other studies in gray literature reports have observed a trend towards more potent products and found product potency levels increase in the first several years after the implementation of sales. Lack of diversity is a major concern in this nascent cannabis industry, particularly in the context of the historic inequities of cannabis prohibition and enforcement. 7 studies address industry participation by either race, ethnicity, or gender. All, with the exception of one paper, primarily focus on participation in legal adult markets. Several studies identified theoretical barriers to participation for racial, ethnic minorities, or women. Researchers identified that the disproportionate impact of prohibition of Black and Hispanic cohorts, criminal record restrictions on industry participation, wealth disparities, and the high cost of business, as well as the tenuous legal standing of the industry, may have greater impacts on minority and/or female participation and leadership in the industry. 2 studies identified that sexualization of products and participation may negatively affect female participation in the industry. However, this body of research is limited, and there were even greater gaps in studies of participation among people with certain intersectional identities such as Black women. Okay, so I hope I haven't lost you guys, since this is one of the more important findings that we found when doing this report. So only one study attempted to examine specific demographic data from legal cannabis markets. This study found that participation data by race ethnicity is broadly lacking. However, authors of the study identified Massachusetts as the only state reporting industry participation by race and ethnicity. So thank you again, commissioners, for your time today and your work regulating this industry, and for all the commission staff teamwork that went into this report. After this preliminary dive into the open data, which is literally a researcher's dream, we truly look forward to continuing to harness this platform to inform many industry-related questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Thank you, Dr. Johnson. That was fascinating. I have some questions about for the commissioners, but I do want to start by just actually amplifying the last thing you said, which is I'm very proud of the fact that from day one we have decided to operate transparently, not just in terms of meetings like this, but we've decided that we were going to have an open data platform. Everything was going to be shared. We were not going to present analyses of data on our system. We were just going to present the data and let people form their own opinions and do their own analyses. And so I did not know that Massachusetts was the only state to do that, but I'm certainly proud of the fact that we are. And so thank you for making that point, Dr. Johnson. Comments or questions from commissioners? Commissioner Doyle?
Sorry, I just have a clarification question. On slide 85, which is the priority status by license status slide, what is provisional consideration? What are the parameters for that? Are they in the application process?
I'll have to get back to you on that one.
Okay.
It's all in the
They haven't
report.
paid, right?
They haven't paid their license fee.
Okay, so it's a little different than how we refer to it in licensing. Okay, got it.
Sorry. No, that's okay. Yeah.
Commissioner Tuttle?
Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for your presentation. Question on the 25% of agents residing in ADIs or identified cities. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding that correctly. So if you're in part of Boston or Worcester and Springfield that is not one of the identified census tracts, you're still counted towards 25%?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so that's the limitation of the data because we weren't able to stratify out by census tract. So for those 4 cities, they were included, so it was likely overestimating.
Thank you.
Well, I'll go all the people think. I have 2 questions for you, I think belying my training as an economist. So on slide 83, where you showed aggregate price per unit by month, no, it's okay. No, I don't need you to look at it because I'm not going to ask you a specific question about the data. But it's pretty interesting how it's fluctuating. It goes up and down. I'm wondering if you have any theory on that, or if there's any kind of econometric modeling or something we could do to try to because I am pretty fascinated by the pricing in this market, and I think the experience of Washington is actually telling. But I think it's a very important issue for us to monitor. And so I just saw when you presented this slide way more month-to-month variation than I would have expected, and I was wondering if you had any thoughts about why.
In the first few years after legalization, there's going to be lots of variation depending, again, going back to those 14 Ps. That's why we put that in context. Because when people talk about states with legalized cannabis, they kind of use it as a homogenous group where they're really very different and according to all those 14 Ps, and then participation, which is effective legalization. So I'm not really sure, but I'm willing to bet that price and just the type of products available are at play, but I'm not sure.
Okay. That's something I think we should talk about a bit in terms of, because I think that it's a pretty important piece of data to understand what's driving it and what's likely to happen in the future, in that it affects 2 things. One is it's going to affect consumption in the legal market and therefore replacement of the illicit market, as you pointed out, but 2, it's going to affect tax revenue as well.
Yeah.
So I'm just very curious about that. The second thing is you mentioned a study or studies that talked about price elasticity with respect to licit versus illicit markets and how much of a premium.
Yeah.
But you were very imprecise. You just said, once it gets above a certain point. And my question to you is, do these studies actually get more precise in terms of kind of how much that premium can be before you start seeing people revert back to the illicit market, or are they qualitative rather than quantitative?
Yeah, I think that data is too new, and as it's we're constantly licensing new companies, so I think it's going to be a while before we can make those kind of judgments.
Right. No, I was just wondering if the literature that came up in your literature review.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering in those scholarly investigations, when they said that there was a certain price premium after which people would start shifting back to illicit in those studies, not our work, but in those studies, do they come up with a specific premium beyond which you start losing people back to the illicit market, or is it just more qualitative?
No, they do. Most of those studies do have a price.
Okay.
And those are listed in the report.
We
Yeah.
do it now, but if I can follow up with that, I'm very interested in seeing kind of what that price premium looks like.
Yeah, as in like an aggregate form, they do. people that are daily users and youth are more likely to be
Yeah, no, I
affected.
saw,
Yeah.
that was a very fascinating slide, so let me offline just
Yeah.
follow up with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
See that in a little more depth. Any other questions or comments for Dr. Johnson? Commissioner McBride?
So there's a point up there that as the market, it seems like as the market matures, that consumers move towards higher potency products.
Yes.
But in the report, you point out that at this time, manual linkage of the original laboratory report and the final product is required to examine the potency level per product.
Yeah.
And that couldn't be conducted for this report, which I totally understand. Is that something that in the future we can do? What would we need to do in order to be keeping track of that? Because that feels to me like an important point to be gleaning as the market matures, if there is a movement towards higher potency products, and what that means.
Yeah, so Dr. McKenna and I had a meeting with Socrata, and we already had discussed this and how we want to move towards being able to more readily make that data accessible for extraction. Right now, you have to go through every individual one, which is impossible to do, obviously, for resources. But yeah, we are already trying to do that. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Anything else? I always find these fascinating. I learn a lot. I think they're really important. Obviously, they're legislatively mandated.
And we're done with the
But,
first year's mandate.
Congratulations on that, but congratulations on another, I think, incredibly valuable set of research and insights. So thank you so much. Appreciate that. I would like to ask for a 5-minute break before we proceed. I need that personally. That's okay. No, I want a 5-minute break before, please.
But also, I have something before we go into executive session.
I would
Yeah,
still like a
yeah,
5-minute break.
no, I'm just asking, don't go into
Thank you.
executive session,
So,
without forgetting that.
5-minute break. Now to speak with the executive director.